Welcome everyone. We are so excited to have you here at the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. This is the sixth conference that we've hosted, so very excited to be doing that again this year. My name is Danielle Hubley, and I manage advocacy and education with the Partnership for Strong Communities. And with me is Dr. Smaila Adelaide from my team. He's helping to support today's session, so we'll be in the background if you have any questions for us or need any support in being present in the session today. So where are you? Today it is 3 o'clock. We are here to learn about housing and everything else, a live exploration of cross-sector solutions. And today's session is sponsored by the Community Builders, so thank you so much for your support of the session. And with that, I will kick it over to Marcus to take over things from there.
Great. Thanks, Danielle. Appreciate it. So I'm just going to jump right in. Affordable housing doesn't need to operate in a vacuum. And the more that we pretend that it does, the more we miss the point. Where we work, where we learn, how we move through and between our communities, and how we build and maintain our health and well-being, a lot of these things contribute to who we are as a person and as a society. And oftentimes, housing feels like it's right in the middle of it all. It's been at the center of CHFA's interview series, Housing And, which is this is a riff of, where I've had a pleasure of talk to both of our panelists today, and I'll drop the links to those interviews in the chat shortly. And over the next hour, I'm hoping that we can explore the intersectionality of housing further. To do that, I'm joined by two powerhouses in their own right, Alex Schiavone and Nadine Horton. Through their distinct but complementary lenses, we'll consider what it looks like to build trust, accountability, and long-term equity and connection in place-based work. I know we're at the end of a very long day, and there's been a ton of incredible insight that we've all received over the course of our many panels and conversations. But I encourage you to stay with us and to stay open. We'd love to hear from you. If you don't consider yourself a housing person, I would say, I would ask, where does housing intersect with your work? If you are in the housing space, what other sectors do you come in contact with most? If you have questions or comments, please drop them in the chat, and I'll do my best to weave them into the conversation as we go along. And if not, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So let's get to it. So I want to start by zooming in on early childhood education. If you read our Housing and interview with Alex, you know that she's not afraid to ask both questions, like, what if housing is the worst workforce strategy? Alex is the executive director of Friends Center for Children in New Haven, where she's helping reimagine what it means to support educators and families. Alex, for those not fully familiar, can you tell us a little bit about the Teacher Housing Initiative and how it came to be?
Sure. Let me just say hi to everybody, and thank you, Marcus, for having me here. And Nadine, it's really nice to be with you again. So our Teacher Housing Initiative is really the first in the country to provide free housing as a salaried benefit for early childhood educators. And it's really was an innovative way for us to solve the question or the problem. How do we raise teacher salaries without raising parent tuition, without more annual fundraising, and in the absence of adequate federal or state funding? And so we launched the program in 2021 with 4 housing units, and we now are expanding to 24 through a mix of both purchased and newly built units. And for the newly built units, we've actually leveraged our partnership with the Yale School of Architecture Gym Block Building Project. And so one of the exciting aspects of this initiative is not only is the educator moving from maybe a $40,000 salary to a $60,000 salaried benefit overnight when they move into free housing, but it also gives us operational savings so we can raise salaries for all of our employees. And now we're in a place where this model is really drawing interest from communities across the country. So that's just a quick overview.
I appreciate that. So, as you think about the Teacher Housing Initiative and where it stands now, I know we've talked a little bit about where it could go, where it has gone, and where it could go. You talk a little bit about like how you serve your current families and where you think the next step might be for the housing initiative. Like when you're thinking about, is it scaling to another? Is it replicating in another city? Is it moving to another state? What are the thoughts around like taking it to the next step?
Yeah, I think in order to do that, I just want to, which we all know, I guess, because we're housing people here, or there's an interest, but just if we believe and we know that in our country, property is the way that we transfer wealth in our country, and that early care and education teachers are often shut out, as are many others, then we have to really figure out how to replicate these things in a way that creates a clear pathway for people to get to home ownership. And that's part of what we're doing here. So the way that I would say in terms of growth and exploration is one, it's really critical that there's a community focused lens, right? What works for us may not work for the partners we're working with in Michigan, or the partners we're working with in Boston, or the partners we're working with in Georgia. And our work as sort of catalyst for change or thinking about things differently is really to listen, to share our experience, to listen, and then adapt and shift based on the individual needs of that community. There's systemic needs that are across our whole country. So early care and education is not affordable or accessible. Housing is not affordable or accessible. The labor market is, we don't have everyone we need in the labor market, and we're losing money across our entire country. So free housing for early care and education teachers would work anywhere in our country, but what it actually comes down to and looks like is dependent on what that community really wants it to look like.
I'm reminded of the conversation that we had a bit ago that this seemed to be like a temporary solve, right? You don't necessarily see a teacher housing initiative that's coupled with early childhood education as maybe like a long-term strategy, because in an ideal world, right,
Yeah,
early childhood educators would actually earn a living wage, right? So I think
right.
that's kind of like what we all kind of would stand behind. To talk a little bit about that, I mean, in terms of like, what's the staying power of a workforce strategy for you and for your organization, like in this space?
So I think what you're referring to is sort of like the framing is like necessity is the mother of all invention.
Hmm.
So we were in a position where we refused to pay our educators below livable wages, and we could not figure out how to do that. So that's when we came up with this concept, because it requires less money. Honestly, it's less money to fundraise and purchase a home than it is to fundraise and pay that to each teacher $20,000 forever. So that's sort of where that piece came to. What I'm hearing in your question is, how do we get to a place where our system is designed so that the cost of living aligns with the with wages? And we are
Hmm.
so far from that. So the federal wage, where that is, and it hasn't shifted. So I don't while we came up with this as a sort of what we would imagine is in an ideal world, a temporary solution, this is going to be a 20, 50-year solution, right? This is
Hmm.
not a 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, even with the legislation, the changes we've made in our state of Connecticut to bring more funding into the early care and education system. It's not going to happen fast enough or with enough investment to really make a significant change. So workforce housing, whether it's childcare, whether it's other professions that are really on the low end of the wage gap, this is really a very workable and reasonable solution to be able to transform lives overnight.
Yeah, and I think let's talk a little bit more about that, because I think about you mentioned, like there are other low earners, low
Yeah.
income earning professions out there that could certainly use benefit from this model. Have you talked to other organizations, other stakeholders, other
Yeah.
sectors about how they might be able to tap into this?
Yes, but I want to be very clear that I am so single focused
Hmm.
on the fact that early care and education teachers, earn less than 97% of all other professions because they are 94% female and disproportionately women of color. So like our focus is so insistent on really looking at this and lifting it up. However, we have met with other sectors and other communities that are focused on a similar gap, whether it be municipal workers, whether it be teachers in terms of the K through 12 system, whether it be healthcare. And this model is applicable to all of those.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's bring Nadine into the conversation. So, and I want to talk a little bit about the work that she's doing, reshaping systems at the ground level as well. Nadine, you work with what's called the True Haven Initiative. So, folks who don't know, it's a place-based initiative that works at the intersection of housing, health, and justice. And when we first spoke for the interview with the Intersect, I was struck by how True Haven was kind of manifested itself out of, it seemed to manifest itself out of these different research initiatives that you had undertaken, that Yale University had undertaken over the years, and whether it's around gun violence or other types of health outcomes. And it seemed to all gradually point itself towards the importance of sustainable housing, and then maybe even more fully to this kind of blueprint on community healing, which I know I'm probably placing that on you, not necessarily how you all think of it. But can you give us a quick snapshot of what True Haven is, what it's been doing, and the kind of the work that you're doing on the ground?
Sure. So again, I want to echo what Alex said. Thank you for the invitation to be here. And of course, Alex, it is always good to see you as well. So True Haven is a research project at the SACE Center for Health and Justice at the Yale School of Medicine. The True in True Haven stands for Trusted Resident. So I want to make that clear. There's a reason why we chose that acronym. And it's a partnership with the Urban League of Southern Connecticut. To conduct a research study to help those who are formerly involved in the justice system and their families, which is the unique part of this particular study, secure and maintain stable housing, and provide access to mental health services. So a lot of our research at the SACE Center, we primarily work with reentry populations. So anything relating to healthcare to that particular populations and how mass incarceration affects healthcare. So we've done lots and lots of studies in the past which focused on the individual. So the person who is either currently incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. What's different with this study is now we're looking at the family impact. So family members of those who are currently incarcerated, because we know those families are very much affected by their loved one who is incarcerated, either by sending them money, going to visit, taking care of children, which is where some of our cross-sector comes in with what Alex is doing. And this particular study came out of a larger R01 study 5 years ago, which looked at gun violence in New Haven. So we were looking at building social networks to lessen the effects of gun violence in New Haven. And out of that particular study came this particular study where we sometimes when people look at the idea of gun violence, it's such a huge overarching issue that they don't know where to start. But what came out of our community advisory board and folks that we worked with is how stable housing can affect something as simple. It may not seem like it has anything to do with gun violence, but when you look at stable, safe, affordable housing and how that can stabilize not just a family, but a street, a neighborhood, and then a city, you'll see that the correlation is actually pretty obvious. So we wanted to explore that more with this particular study.
That's great. So what have you learned so far? I know when did the study launch, and what have you learned in terms of both, like, obviously in data collecting, but also what it takes to run an initiative like this, in trying to deal with the various sectors that you're hoping to address?
So we are in our 4th year of the study, and this is very different in that we are a true community partnered study. So that means that our community partner, which in this case is the Urban League of Southern Connecticut, is a co-primary investigator on the study. So they're not just in name only, they're not just an advisory board member, they literally are helping to run and drive the study. So they get, indirects from the university. They get to decide how things are run. They get to help decide the intervention. They get access to the research. So just as a primary investigator would at the university, this community partner has the same access. So when we say community partnered, in this case, we truly mean community partners. It does not go along. In fact, in this particular case, it is driven by the community partner. We're the research side, but the community partner is truly providing the intervention.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And when you think about the how, like, kind of bringing housing back into this, talk a little bit more about like what that housing component looks like specifically, so that the folks who are housers that are listening in, is there anything that they might be able to tap into and relate to their work?
Right. So one of the biggest things we found when folks are coming home from incarceration, or family members of, particularly, we'll start with folks who are returning home from incarceration. It is very, very difficult to get access to safe, affordable housing because you're justice involved. So even if you were to come home and you were to immediately find a job, you were able to get a good paying job, your credit is well, you have a good support system under you. As soon as that landlord runs that background check and it pops that you've been justice involved, at any point, you will get denied that housing. It doesn't matter what kind of person you are now. It doesn't matter how many references you can get. And it doesn't matter. As long as they see justice involved, it's like everything stops. If you are a family member of, lots of times you may be in public housing. When your loved one comes home, they can't come home to you because that will make you lose your access to public housing. So let's say you have a Section 8 voucher or you're in federally assisted housing. Depending on the charge, you can't have your loved one come back home. So again, you're keeping family members apart. So it could be whether that's, male or female, a father coming home to a family, a mother coming home to her family, trying to get access back to her children to reunite families. That all stops. If you can get access to housing, a lot of times it's not in the best of neighborhoods. Sometimes you're going back to the neighborhood that you came out of. You can get only what you can afford, which a lot of times is maybe rooming houses or sober houses, they're called, or transitional housing, where you have to stay for a certain designated amount of time. You just can't move, and it feels as if you are still incarcerated. You just don't have bars anymore, so you're very limited in how you can move. And then again, in terms of the family members, because they've been supporting their loved ones while they were incarcerated for so long, they may not have the ability to save up money to move to a different neighborhood, because now, let's say that loved one is coming home, and sometimes this is what we found, they put their housing in jeopardy, but they want to bring their loved one home. So they're trying to now support that loved one till they can get a job, till they can get on their feet. So it puts further strain on that family member of who's now trying to not just take care of themselves and maybe children of, but now the family member as well. So you're basically kind of stuck with where you are.
I'm struck by something, Marcus. Can I share something?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's hear it. Yeah.
I'm listening to Nadine, and what we're really just talking about are these obstacles to housing, right?
Mhm.
And the drastic nature of them. And I think there's a mental gymnastics that we do as a society where we create reasons why people don't have housing. So in this case, someone was incarcerated. In this case, they don't, they don't work hard enough, and we're talking about these two segments of the population where a teacher can't get access to housing. So how would we expect anyone who has these like preconceived biases against them just based on our systemic sort of lenses? And so that struck me as just like really wow, like how difficult it would be to navigate the housing situation in our country if you have any sort of named obstacle on your credit or on your report. And the second thing was just the parallel between the work that we do. There is a framing around the preschool to prison pipeline for a reason. It is a very real thing. And so the work that we're doing in the preschool lens and the way that sets a person's trajectory or can set a trajectory in our country, we're just talking about so many obstacles to access and health and basic needs. And it's just really, really striking.
No, I know you both, it's important to note, you seem to have this connection when you think about the intersectionality of everything. The one piece that you both have in common is that financial fitness piece, right? So you're both realizing that folks are become under-equipped. And I wouldn't say this is necessarily, tied to any one income. I know people who have kind of gone through a 4-year or 5-year college degrees to come out and have no idea how the financial system works. So talk a little bit about that, like either one of you, kind of like the importance of financial literacy and planning to help kind of bridge the gap from where you are to where you want to go.
Alex, you want to start or you want me to start?
Whichever, Nadine.
I guess I'll just say, so again, our folks are reentry. So we have folks who have been incarcerated in upwards of 20, 30 years. So imagine if you went in at 17. You never knew anything about paying rents, paying bills. You literally went from your parents' house into incarceration. Now you're coming out 20, 30 years later. It's a completely different world. There's no such thing as cash anymore. It's all cards, and you have to have accounts and you have to have credit. The folks coming home into that new world know nothing about this. Similarly, family members of who are, this could be generational, this could be folks who maybe had like a really good paying job, their family member went in, and now half of their income goes to supporting those folks while they're incarcerated. So now maybe they had excellent credit, but now because they have to support their loved one, bills start to get missed. The credit starts to go down. Some folks never had any clue about credit. Some folks, while they were incarcerated, unfortunately, sometimes we find that people take their identity and they open up accounts in their name. They had no clue. So the first time, what's a credit report? I don't understand the importance of a credit report. What's a debit card? I don't know how to pay bills. They're very much used to, if they got a paycheck, it's like, I'm going to give a certain portion for child support. I feel very this is what we found as well, is folks feel guilty for their family members supporting them while they were incarcerated. So I have to help out my mom. I have to help out, my grandma. I have to look out for my kids. They don't know how to set budgets and things like that. So it's basically starting back to maybe things that we learned when we were in school, like just basic, economics, but it's literally starting back from the beginning. What's a credit report? Here's how much you make here's how much you get a week in your paycheck. What bills do you have? Here's how to make a budget to pay these bills. Always pay yourself first. It's literally starting from the beginning for a lot of folks, and then teaching folks the importance of, you always start with yourself first. I know there's this pull to like, I have to help this one and I got to do this, but you always have to start with yourself first, because what we try to impress on folks is that if you are not well, nobody else will. And this ties back to what our primary focus is with healthcare, is if you are not well and the stress of trying to come home and get, reunited with your kids, trying to find a job, trying to find a safe place to stay, everything else gets pushed to the side. So if you came home with, blood pressure issues or diabetes issues or cardiovascular issues, those things are exacerbated by your stress and worry about, where am I going to live? How am I going to get my kids back? All these things. So there's everything can circle back to and out from housing.
Yeah, I would say for us, so our initiative is about figuring out ways that early care and education teachers can be included in this concept of generational wealth. So the free housing is not meant to be permanent. It's a place during which educators can move in, and so they remove the expensive rent. So now they actually have some dollars in their budget. Because I think this concept of, financial literacy has to be looked at through the lens of the scarcity mindset that we have as a system. And you can just see it in housing. We could solve the housing crisis in our state, in our country, if we wanted to. We don't want to. Right? It's the same way we could solve the childcare crisis. It's all these things. We're choosing not to. I just want to make sure we're clear about that. And we set ourselves up, or the system sets us up to fight with each other around resources. That is a false narrative. And so I think about that a lot. So let's take that. Then we've got these teachers who are moving in. They're intentionally in housing, not to be permanent, but to build equity in themselves. So we partner them with a fiscal mentor. And it's what's been really interesting about that is in conversation with the teachers. If you've ever been in a situation where your budget can't meet your expenses, you actually are quite good at figuring out your finances. You have to shuffle things around, you move things. So it's, for us, it's really been shifting from this scarcity mindset to, now I actually have some funds, and what do I do with them? And so that's where our financial literacy, our financial coaching comes into place. Because if you talk to the teachers who have been before housing, they know how to stretch their dollar so they pay, their rent this date exactly, and pay their electric bill right before it gets shut off, and buy food on these dates, and that whole system and cycle. It's exhausting. It is not how you get to be the best educator. And if we do not meet people's basic needs, we are not going to have the outcomes that we want in our country. So that's sort of how we think about financial literacy, in addition to all the things that Nadine said.
Yeah, you bring a great point to the forefront, and I think that's something that I know a lot of folks that that come to this space believe deeply that housing is a human right, right? It's not something that is just like this financial instrument that we use and abuse it at times. But I love that kind of like ringing that bell, and be interested to hear if other people feel the same way, or if there is another side to that coin. Let's do the poll. I want to make sure that we don't lose people. I know I see a lot of folks here in the room, but I want to make sure that people are awake at their computers. So. We talked a lot about different types of systems, different sectors. Of course, we talked about education and justice reentry just now, but there are plenty others. What do you all think? Which system do you most often partner with in your housing related work? Great. So it looks like a good distribution, right? Plenty of folks who don't intersect or interact with other sectors, which hopefully this will be motivation to change that. But education's a little low on that. What do you think about that, Alex, in terms of
I,
like, does that make sense to you, or are you kind of surprised by that?
Oh, it makes a lot of sense for a couple reasons. Well, first of all, I should say I love it because it's to me a challenge. Like, okay,
Hmm.
now we have a lot of things that we can do to make this work. This it's not surprising at all. I mean, we're the first people in the country to do this work,
Hmm.
right? So this has not been talked about or thought about, and the reason why is goes back to this siloed mindset and the scarcity mindset and the skill sets that are required to make
Hmm.
these connections, right? So
Yep. Yep.
if we stay in our own silos, we are not going to think creatively and try to solve these really systemic hundred year old problems. We should not continue to do things the same way that we've been doing it. So how do we get out of that mindset? And that to me, this is a great representation of that. Like we haven't thought about housing and education. And I also would argue that the root of a lot of our issues, when you talk about, like I said, preschool to prison, when you talk about mental health, when you talk about economic mobility and empowerment, if you are not focusing on education, then all those other things stem from that. And
Hmm.
so interesting that we've sort of separated these two things as opposed to putting them together.
Now, I do know, and I can see in the room, I know there's plenty of folks who do work at the intersection of housing and other things. So I'd love to, if you want to drop something into the chat that answers this question. But Alex, Nadine, how did you all, if we covered it a little bit, maybe we touched it a little bit, but how did you all land on which organizations to collaborate with? Like obviously New Haven, just like many other cities in Connecticut, is rich with these community-based organizations who are doing really incredible work. So must have, I mean, there might be hard to kind of find those partners, even though it does feel like there are plenty of them. How did you go about saying, you know what, I want to work with X, Y, or Z and establish that bond?
I will speak not just from the New Haven perspective, but also in the other states that we're doing, and just
Hmm.
say that for us, the critical thing is to look for the strengths that already exist within the community, right?
Hmm.
So you're looking for those strengths, and a strength can also be a weakness in some cases. So, like unused housing stock is a strength with regard to this initiative, as opposed to a weakness for a community. Community organizations with deep local trust. We looked at universities, of course, in terms of design and research capacity, philanthropic partners who are really eager to support bold solutions because a lot of sort of bold solutions need to come from the philanthropic area first and then translate over into the public sector. Um, but I think one of the key roles that I'll say too, and this is just, I know Nadine and I know each other offline, so I know this is true for both of us. Our role is not to own these
Hmm.
resources or these ideas. It's really to share, to braid existing assets together that then can support people to be their best selves. And I think that's to me critical if you're going to take this on or look at this work.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think
Nadine.
one of the things I love the most is bringing people who would never cross paths together. That is one of the things I love to do the most. So I consider myself a pretty good facilitator or bringing together of different folks person. Um, to Alex's point, it's vital for us in the work that we do because of the population that we deal with, which can be deeply distrustful for many reasons of Lots of promises made by a lot of organizations that are out there in my city. I'm born and raised New Haven. I love it. It will always be my home. But there's a lot of organizations in the city who say they're doing the work who are not.
Hmm.
It's just that simple. And we've learned that firsthand from our folks who come home and say, I tried to get an ID, or I tried to get a bus pass, or I tried to get transportation too, and I couldn't do it. Or I was looked down like I was the dirt underneath someone's shoe. And I just didn't, I just left. I didn't want to be bothered with it anymore. So when you're dealing with folks who already have a built-in distrust of the system, it is vital to work with community partners who have that deep trust that Alex was talking about, that proven record of doing the work. They're credible. So they don't just say what they do, they prove what they do. You can say the name Urban League and people know, oh, I know them. I know the person who works there. I know the person who's running it. So it's those kind of people that we want to partner with, because again, we want to make sure that we're trying to set people up for success. So if we're sending them to a place where they say they do one thing, but they don't, they will never come back to us again. We will lose them. And that's shameful on everyone's part if that happens, because we can't allow that to happen. So taking the time to build those relationships, in the case with us, with the Urban League, they had partnered with us 12 years ago. I've only been at the university, at the State Center for about almost 8.5 years, but they had been doing work with the university on gun violence over 12 years ago. They literally were going out with researchers, knocking on doors in the neighborhood. The university had the sense to realize, okay, this is a partner. They get it. They know the neighborhoods. The neighborhood residents know them. They'll open the door when Urban League comes knocking. So if you're coming with a researcher now, you're building that foundation of trust. So it's vital to partner with people who've been doing the work and can prove that their work has been impactful to folks.
Hmm. So what are some barriers? I know, Nadine, you gave an amazing list there. What are some barriers that are, that you've hit and you've been able to kind of get to the other side, you want to make sure that folks that are here, that's not smooth sailing, and it certainly does require a lot of work, but what's an example of something that a wall that you hit and you got through because either by collaborating with others, or you figured you just kind of kept at it till you got to the other side?
I think the piece that surprised us the most is the credit piece. So credit
Mhm.
score piece, I should say. So when we first put this together, we thought this was our hypothesis on the research side. If we could just get folks like rental assistance, if we could get them help with their first and last, that would be wonderful. What we found is that, again, like I think I mentioned before, even if you have a good job, you can afford the rent. You can afford the first, last, and sometimes 2 months security deposit. When they run that credit report, if your credit score is low, doesn't matter. So
Mhm.
really impressing upon, and that didn't kind of come out until we started working more with our community partner who does like housing counseling, talking to community advisory board members to say, who are in the housing space, to say this is really, really important. So it kind of helped us pivot to stress upon the importance of, you've got to get your credit score up. And what we found is, even when folks start the intervention, so they work with a dedicated housing counselor who teaches them about, runs their credit score, looks at everything on that credit score, breaks everything down for them, helps them to set up a budget, looks at, more importantly, meets the person where they are. So look at what you're making now. While it would be wonderful for you to make 20,000, 30, this is where you are now, and what you are making now, and how you can pay your bills with what you're making now. And just get them to understand the importance of that. And then sometimes within a very few sessions, 2, 3, it's like, oh, I got it. Okay, this is what I need to do. And we've seen credit scores go up 20, 30 points within just 2 sessions. That's amazing. And
Mhm.
that will carry them far beyond the study. I know we've said to folks, because I've personally said it to folks, your participation in the study is wonderful, but you learning about your credit and getting your credit score up is going to carry you throughout life. You're going to be able to get an apartment, to get a car, to get a better job. All of these things are based upon your credit. So I think changing the mindset of people who thought, well, if I just get a good job, if I'm just making enough, I'm good. No, it's like you have to have credit is king and queen in this world that we're living in now. And if you don't have that, you don't have anything.
Did you want me to jump in there on barrier?
Yeah, what do you think,
Okay.
Alex?
Yeah. So I think, honestly, I mean, I keep going to this like macro level, but the greatest barrier has really been working within this system, or systems, I should say, that are not built to support early childhood educators or the families who rely on them. And so that looks like chronic underfunding, restrictive regulations, and what that translates to is just these siloed public agencies that make innovation really difficult. And so what we've done to work around, that's the biggest barrier that we faced. You know, we came up with this idea and it was sort of, we don't know how to do that. We've never done that. What are you talking about? And it was just like, okay, we're just going to keep saying, we're going to keep talking about it. And so the way we worked around them was really by building our own ecosystem of support. And that came from philanthropic investment, community partnerships, like Nadine mentioned. And this is really flexible program design that can work for whatever community we're in. And I think that's something for us all to really lean into. So when a system cannot adapt quickly enough, like we're in a crisis, any of us who are working in housing or in childcare or in dealing with people who are not having their basic needs met, you're in a crisis. So we have to pilot these new approaches at a small scale, demonstrate their impact, and then bring that evidence to policymakers and funders. At the same time, we're on the advocacy side, really pushing and fighting for things that we should all have. And so we really do that by staying nimble, creative, and really rooted in the mission. So rooted in the mission, but taking any possible avenue we can to affect change. That's sort of how we overcome barriers.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And you mentioned something a second ago, Alex, that I hate to get nerdy maybe and lose people, but the question around philanthropy, it makes me think in the conversation earlier, we talked a little bit about scaling and replicating.
Yeah.
And I understand the pressure that a lot of funders. I work for a funder, and a lot of folks on the call, either with CDFIs or in different types.
Yep.
They're in the space where we're here to invest.
Yep.
And there is that pressure to make things scale, to make things go beyond the 10x or to beyond the initial scope.
Yep.
What do you think about that? I mean, does it need to scale in order for it to work, or can something just exist for them in the moment in time and in a place, and it's okay if it doesn't scale? Where do you fall on that?
So I'm a yes and. Like
Mm.
you meet the immediate need and you try to figure out the long-term solution. What I think is really interesting and wonderful about innovation is that the yes does not have to be the and, meaning you could start where it is now, but in 7, 10, 12 years, when you're at a place where you're ready to scale, it may need to look differently. And if you stay nimble and flexible and really rooted in equity, which means you're meeting the need that's in front of you, not the need that was there 5 years ago or that may be there in 7 years, but it's like a really active process. I think that's where the true success can come. So in the example of our housing work, what we do at Friend Center, which is we own and we allow the teachers to live there rent-free, is not what our scaling version looks like. What scaling looks like is that an investor, a CDFI or a municipality or a state actually buys housing stock and puts it in a trust, owns it, and they offer the housing to the educator if they're in that sector, in that town, or in that region. And the criteria for accessing housing is based on the community. So every community looks different. The 3 communities we are in, it looks different for each one. What that does then, it's a yes for this moment. And let's say you fix the problem, meaning we have adequate funding in the early care and education system in 30 years. You no longer need the housing. Now, as a municipality, you own that housing and can use it for what's needed at that moment. So that's the yes and for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Nadine, what do you think about that in terms of because I mean, certainly your initiative has been built, designed to meet the needs of New Haven, but it doesn't need to exclusively. Do you think about bringing it to other communities and what that might look like?
Yes. So one of the things one of the goals of the study is to have this replicate throughout the country. So very much right there with Alex, very much a yes and person, because with mass incarceration, it can seem so overwhelming and so daunting You get caught up in the big, we need to trail down these huge structural barriers, racism, all kinds of things that feed into what mass incarceration has become, that you get to the point where you do nothing or you just have no idea where to start. So it's very much a yes, and we can work on, decarceration and and then the effects that mass incarceration has had on particularly folks of color. And also meeting people where they are right now, which is folks coming home need safe, affordable housing. They need that. And it doesn't have to be this huge project or we just can't do it. I saw a comment from Fateria, who I've been fortunate to be in rooms with. That's one of the things we're looking at. Let's have a vetted list of landlords who are willing to rent to people who have histories of incarceration or justice involved. And also we can have, and we've done this in the study, we've had folks who have gone through the financial training, and the housing counselor has literally written a letter to the landlord to say they are currently in taking these courses or they just completed. Would you be willing to rent to them? We've had cases where they were facing eviction. They've written a letter to the landlord to say, the housing counselor said, they're in classes right now. Can we work on something, to stop this eviction process? And it's worked. So it doesn't have to always be this huge, we have to stop, mass incarceration. It can be yes. And also we just help somebody from getting evicted because they're taking these classes through this study. They've written a letter and the landlord was willing to work with them. And I would say if there's any, I might be jumping the question a little bit, but I think it's just, it's the solutions don't always have to be so big. And I think that's where sometimes people get paralyzed or they don't realize maybe they're so removed, and this happens with research a lot. They get so removed from the problem because they're not out in community that they don't see it, and they don't see how something as simple as just writing a letter can literally change somebody's future from being homeless to now they're staying in their apartment and now the landlord is willing to work with them. And then we've also gotten, on the flip side, letters back from landlords saying this tenant is wonderful. And that would have never happened if they didn't give them a chance. So it's like learning from both sides. Yes, the person coming home or family member of, and also the landlord who is now seeing, just because this person was just as involved, it doesn't mean they're a horrible person. They're an excellent tenant. Some of the best tenants some of these landlords have ever rented to because they work so hard. They work so hard. So very much a yes and person.
Mm-hmm. I'm reminded of the earlier session around storytelling, and it was that stuck. So she just stole my thunder. I was like, it's simple solutions and communications. How do we get these stories out there? I mean, here are two, I think, amazing, impactful, overwhelming. Just kind of like just add the adjectives as you will, that I feared a whole lot of people don't know about, and not necessarily because you want to scale. Or I can appreciate this. We need to stay focused and mission driven, but just to let people know that these things exist so that they can draw inspiration from them. So what are some things that, I know, Alex, you do quite a bit of storytelling in your own right on social media and YouTube and these other places. What are some things that we can be doing as organizations, across the housing continuum to get the word out on the things that we're doing?
I will say for us, we have to do a better job of getting so again, keeping in mind the population that we work with. Some folks are very much of the mindset of you've done the crime, you deserve whatever happened to you and forever will happen to you. They are not willing to move past. We say we're a second chance society, depends on who you are, where you live, what you look like, your income level, all of those things. We have to do a better job of getting the positive stories out, because I think there are a lot of little success stories, and I'll put the word little in quotation marks, that have huge impacts on folks. We have to do a better job of getting that out. And I say we in the research community, because this is one of my things, and I come from a community background, so it's something that I'm constantly pushing our team on. We're very good at writing papers and presenting at conferences, but how are we getting the word back out to the community of what we're doing? There's lots of people, once they hear what we're doing, they're fully on board, but they never knew we were doing this work. And we've been doing this work. They've been doing this work here before I came for over 15 years now. People don't know because we don't talk about it to community, and we have to get community more involved, because when you have community behind you, you can get past anything, because community is not beholden to anyone. They're not beholden to an office. They're not beholden to a position. They're not beholden to a CV. They're just about what's best for their community. So if you can get community on board, and if we can do a better job of, in plain English, explaining what we're doing to community, that can get us more, especially in the people that we work with and the field that we're in, which is mass incarceration, breaking past that barrier. Because I promise you, everyone has somebody who's been touched by the justice system, whether it's your family member, a friend, somebody in your community. Maybe your neighborhood has been touched by violence. So, literally in my community, we have the county jail that's been there over 40 years. Somebody who's been touched by the justice system, but changing the narrative on that to switch it to more to retributive, to more like rehabilitative and restorative, and just sharing the success stories of folks who, the person who's been incarcerated for 20 years came back home, got this training, was able to get a good job, get a great apartment, reunite with their family, become involved in civic engagement in their community. All these things, they're happening right now, but people don't know because we don't talk about it enough.
Thanks, Nadine. What I heard in your question, Marcus, too, was people who are listening on the call, and this is what I say to anyone who is not in my sector, is like, when you are at decision-making places, spaces, tables, whatever the word you want to use, please bring us to the table. Doesn't mean us literally have to be there, but talk about us. The things, what happens in our society when we ignore early care and education is we have this tremendous economic impact. So we lose $122 billion a year because we do not have a robust 0 to 3 system in our country. Connecticut, it's 1.5 billion. But these are huge numbers. That has an impact on every single person who lives, works, and tries to thrive in our society. That's just economic. Forget the social, emotional, the educational, all the other benefits from it. So you could make the same case for housing, right? These what I consider fundamental basic needs. So housing, childcare, workforce, economic development, those are all the crux of, and that impacts everyone. So the two things that I always say to people is, one, bring us to the table, think about us. What is happening in your community around early care and education, and how are people being shut out of it? Because it's systemically the same people who are consistently being shut out of these opportunities. Number two is make the case about the personal impact, which is what Nadine was just saying. Every single one of us is impacted by incarceration in our country. Every single one of us is impacted by the lack of appropriate system for early care and education in our country. It doesn't matter where you fall. It may feel differently to you, right? It may not be a personal connection, but you are impacted by it. And I see part of my work is trying to help people recognize the relationship if they're 70 and have no one in the early care and education system, how it impacts them. And that's, I think, what would be helpful to have everyone around this table do.
Yeah, it makes, as I'm hearing you both weigh in, the underlying issues, the challenges that you all are setting out to address, are those things that we as a society don't like to talk about, right? Whether it's mental health or justice involvement or our dependence and need on childcare, early childcare especially. So of course we're not going to have we don't want to address the solutions because we don't even want to address to talk about the problems as they exist. So it's almost like I'm going back and like, of course, like it's a silly question to ask, but of course, right? Um, we have some housers on the phone, in the room. Um, what do you say to people who are firmly in housing? And I'm thinking about developers specifically, but maybe, people that are in the housing finance. You got their ear on something. You're at a cocktail party or at a coffee shop. What is the thing that you tell them that they need to know about the work that you're doing as people who are kind of like the dollars and cents trying to make the deals work, pencil out, really only focused on the capital stack, as it were. What is something that you're telling them about the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I heavily lean into the return on investment because there's no other compounded return on investment in terms of this initiative. And this is the work we've done to really study and look at the return on investment, both from a cash perspective. So if we're going to spend 4 million on housing, how much do we get out of it every year in salary savings? And for us, it's around 500,000 a year in salary savings. So you've got that first ROI. Then on top of that, you're adding the societal ROI around childcare, which is around 7.5% in our state. And then you add on top of it the housing ROI. And this is really where I will actually say to the housing folks in the room, what is the right data? Where do we find this data? Because we've looked for it and tried to really capture it. We're averaging around 19 to 22% in terms of our research. When you put all that together, each initiative that we're working on across the country has between a 40 and 45% ROI plus, compounded ROI and social ROI, right? Where else are you going to get that? So it's about sort of putting that in. And I think there's ways, if you're looking at social impact investing and people who really need to get a return on their investment, there are some really creative ways that you could imagine doing that in this initiative. For example, creating an initiative. So it's not going to give you a market rate return, right? Because we're not selling these at market rate. That doesn't work, right? That makes housing unaffordable. So, but you could imagine creating, let's say, 100 units, 50 of which are rented at market value and 50 of which are free. It reduces, obviously, your return, but it still gives the investor a return. So there's different ways that we're sort of thinking about how you scale this in really large scale or these sort of landlocked areas where rentals are really hard to come by and we need new builds. That's sort of what I lean into when I'm talking really on the finance side of things.
Mm-hmm. How about you, Nadine? Do you have a chance to interact with folks who are kind of in the housing community development space who may be kind of unsure about how they might be able to interact with True Haven?
I think the biggest thing, I would, if I'm talking to landlords, is to reduce the look back window. And what the look back window is the amount of years that a person can look back at a person's involvement in so checking like a credit report or their criminal history, the amount of years that they can look back. You would be amazed that before certain things were put in place, as in legal action was taken, they could look back 20, 30 years and deny somebody housing. That actually did happen. Recently in New Haven, the offense took place 25 years ago, and they were denied housing today, which is ridiculous. And we partnered with some folks who brought that legal action, who said this can't be, this is not right. But it took the people who were affected to be able to stand up and say, yes, I was formerly just as involved. So because there's a stigma involved with this. So Alex, you heard her talk about the struggles with teachers. How could it be impossible for teachers? That's something that everybody should be behind, right? So imagine if it's hard for teachers, it's damn near impossible for our folks. So it took these people willing to stand up in front of a microphone, a camera, to say, yes, we were formerly just as involved. That was a very long time ago. We are trying to get decent, affordable housing for ourselves and our family now, and we couldn't do it. And it took people to say, this is not right, including legal and housing folks to say, this is ridiculous. So I think changing that look back window is very, very, very important. And then really having a vetted list of landlords, because a lot of our folks who are coming home, they're going to rent. Of course, we hope home ownership is down the line. Everybody doesn't want to own a home. Everybody probably shouldn't own a home, but everybody has the right to safe, affordable rentals. And I think if we could create a vetted list of landlords who are willing to rent to folks who are just as involved, so again, you have, and I won't get on my soapbox too much, but the city can be a really big driver of this because the city holds the carrot and the stick. The city funds a lot of these organizations, including housing folks, who can rent to folks or work out some type of program. And the city who are funding these folks can bring everybody to the table and say, sit down. So if we can't find a way to get together, come out of our silos, the city can say, I'm going to bring everybody together, or folks who I think should be together, sit down, and then you're going to talk to each other, or we're going to reduce your funding until you get such and such in place. We're going to put benchmarks in place. You're a housing program. You say you help these people. Let's see how many people who are just as, and I don't know, look, y'all, I'm not a housing person, so I don't know if this is legal or not. So if it's not, please forgive me, but put certain benchmarks in place to say, okay, we're going to see how much you work with this particular group of folks, or how you put financial education in place for this or that, just something in place to just say, you can't just look along the favorable occupations or groups of folks, because everybody at some point who's been incarcerated, unless you receive a life sentence without parole, is coming back to community at some point. And what are they coming back to? That's going to really determine their recidivism rate, whether they go back in or not, whether they can be a successful member of their community, their city, their family member or not. What kind of community, what kind of situation are they coming back to? And a lot of that stems from the housing that they're going back to. If they're not going back to safe, affordable housing, if they're in a place where it's still lots of violence and drugs and all these things that may have led to them going in the first place, how can they be successful? How can their family be successful? How can the neighborhood, the city be successful if housing is not put first in the forefront for everyone, regardless of occupation? Or I like to say a lot of times, you are not your offense, you're who you are now. So that's who is in front of us right now. Not what you did. I don't care if it's a year ago. Who the person is in front of me right now is who we're dealing with. That has to be the mindset, I think, of even folks who are renting to folks. And then finally, in New Haven, we have a lot of market rate housing going up, a lot, to the point where even folks who are making a good living, working at the university, working at the hospital, they can't afford to live here anymore. So how in the world is somebody who's coming home from incarceration, or folks who are in public housing because that's all they could get? Section 8 list is years and years and years long. We need more affordable housing, but it needs to be done in a way that has dignity in it for everyone. So I don't want to see another Church Street South. I don't want to see that, because that literally congregated a bunch of folks who are lower income into, like, they were herded off over here to the side somewhere. I grew up at Brookside. That was a world away. That was public housing. It's set apart from the city. It feels like it's not even in New Haven proper. If you want to do mixed rate housing, you want to do housing in a way that makes people want to live there, including folks who are doctors and nurses and teachers alongside, and you would never know this unless they chose to tell you, folks who are just as involved. So don't just herd them off into public housing or segregated over here. Put them in beautiful, safe, that has green space, that has access to transportation, that has access to stores and grocery stores and things that everybody else who is not just as involved has and takes for granted. You want to mix them in because they're just like everybody else. That's what I would say.
Thank you. That was lovely. And Alex, any parting thoughts? I know we're running low on time. Just got a couple of minutes left. How about this? Why don't you tell folks who are still listening in, and where should they go if they want to engage with? I'll start with the Friend Center, and then we'll go back to Nadine. If they really want to know more about Friend Center, the Teacher Housing Initiative, or just kind of get connected, what do they do?
Yeah, I think the best place to go would be our website, friendcenterforchildren.org. But easy way to remember that is our phone number, which is 203-FRIENDS. So give us a call.
Nice.
We're happy to support in any way we can.
Good job on getting that number. That's awesome. And Nadine, how about you? If somebody's interested in learning more about True Haven or the other work that you all are doing on the research side.
So I would say to visit the Urban League website, so www.ulsc.org, and then you can type in True Haven and it'll bring you right to the page, which will tell you all about the study and how to get involved.
Great. All right. Well, thank you both so much for taking the time to talk to us today. And best of luck for everything you've got coming your way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for letting us be here.
Of course.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take
Thanks
care.
so much, everyone. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, Nadine. Thank you, Alex. It was great to have you wrap up our day today. For folks who are still on the call, tomorrow we will kick off at 9:30 with our opening keynote panel, and look forward to another great day of conversations. Thanks so much. Get some good rest. We'll be back to learn together tomorrow.